Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. This week featured Champions League Matchday 4 at home versus Sevilla, and Premier League match number 12 also at home against Burnley. Welcome back, Professor.
Hi, Dove. Not only did you get to fly solo, you got to fly solo with that Newcastle game. That was exciting.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I mean, definitely, if you have anything to add beyond what we covered, I'm curious for your thoughts, especially on the officiation.
There's two areas that really generated a lot of officiating talk. One on the goal. Three different VAR checks in one goal is annoying, especially when they all went against us. I mean, having watched it again. So what I'll say is, I did not watch that game live. I only watched everything after hearing about all the noise against it and sources I was watching. I was very careful to sort of keep an eye on what was happening. As far as the three different calls, I am not convinced the ball was out of bounds. I understand why people are, but I understand the cameras, the angles. Maybe there should be a camera.
I'm not convinced either way. Like, I didn't see a camera angle that definitively shows that it stayed inbounds. The one that we did get to see did make it look out of bounds, but I agree it's not conclusive.
It's not conclusive. The second call there, the non-push on Gabriel, again, sort of knowing that was coming, as I watched the replay, I could see why it wasn't called. Like, I feel like it's the kind of thing I've seen not called. I can see sort of how he's leaning, and perhaps, maybe before this extension. I was significantly more bothered by that when Bukayo Saka was called for a push in the box against Burnley there. That was pretty much the same amount of push. And then I found the lack of offside decision mostly frustrating because, like, they couldn't. What do you mean you couldn't figure out when? I just found that explanation unconvincing. Although overall, I mean, again, kind of one of those, put yourself in the situation if you were Newcastle. I could see why they would feel justified in not being angry, especially with all three calls, then essentially going in there. Hang on, we lost the server there, so hang on. We'll reconnect. Hopefully we'll reconnect. Yes, I know I'm offline because you are the worst. Yeah, so to turn it the other way, I can see from Newcastle's perspective, having the three reviews on the goal, all of them going in Newcastle's favor. I found a lot of them they were all close calls. Obviously, as an Arsenal fan, I'm frustrated. But to me, the call that I was particularly outraged about, and I think the one that Arteta in particular was outraged about, wasn't the goal. It was Bruno Guimaraes elbowing, I think it was Jorginho in the head. Don't elbow people in the head. I don't know how much more clearly we can say these kinds of things. That was the one that I'm just like, how is there nothing there? I mean, should Newcastle feel slightly aggrieved that Kai Havertz is still in the game after, the kick he had? And could that have been a red? Yeah, I understand their frustration there, and I get that. And I do find it kind of hilarious that they got a bunch of yellows for arguing about it while it was happening.
Right.
But, I mean, and then afterwards, there were some comments released in review, and I can't remember where I saw, but some comments in review. The general consensus from the review and the officiating from the league and from PGMOL was, okay, there should have been a red for Havertz. Okay. I can't be super angry about that. But for them to come back and be split on whether or not Bruno's elbow is a violent, whether or not it's violent conduct, like, I don't. What are you looking at?
Yeah.
And that to me is where Arteta, that as far as I see in some of the conversation afterwards, is where you see Arteta's anger really come in. But then he had a lot of really nice things to say about the officials after this weekend. So
when you're winning, it's easy to be kind.
Yeah, I mean, I thought overall the officiating was fine.
It was
on Saturday, and again, we're very critical of them instances. In some instances, we should be able to turn around and say, actually, I thought they did a good job on some cases. It's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay to say the referees did a good job, but that also is where it opens up to the referee saying referees are having a poor game, and especially in a game like this Newcastle one because of the intensity. We talked about being at St. James's Park. I mean, we talked about last year's game. There's a lot of intensity in that game. It was a very physical game. does feel like some teams are allowed to play physical with their opposition and more so than others, and Newcastle's one that seems to be able to get away with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Make of that what you will, but that's how I saw it. But yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. So before we move on to other topics, a couple things I wanted to mention is, first of all, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. We appreciate you. Subscribe to our channel. It'll help us to get more viewers and keep going. If you hit the like buttons and subscribe to our channel, I'm told that that's a good thing, that it'll help us out. So please do when you get a chance. I don't want to only ever ask at the end. I want to ask at the beginning sometimes too, because that hopefully falls on more ears. The other thing, a funny anecdote I wanted to share with you. So, my son is a character, and he's like 6.5 years old now. And the other day he was doing like the L on his forehead thing, right? Except he wasn't doing an L, he was doing a C, right? And I was like, it's supposed to be an L, right? He's like, no, it's C for Chelsea. And somehow I'm doing something right. Like that came through as an insult to him. So Good. Yeah, it was just very funny that he knew of the team and knew that it was, a rival. So yeah,
raising them right, as they say. Who, by the way, had a cracker of a game apparently this past weekend to draw Manchester City 4-4, which is just, I didn't see any of it. I just saw the score. Apparently, it got crazy. Which wow. Chelsea, who has struggled to score goals, apparently has scored 8 goals in 2 games against City and Spurs. So,
very interesting.
Yeah. Wow. We're still not very good, but that's
So if we could spend a few minutes on some follow-up, and this is kind of going back a few weeks now for some of these. So for one thing, we had talked about Odegaard having to take the long way around back to the bench, right? And then that came up this most recent week also with Saka, I think, when Saka was injured. It was like some kind of leg injury, and they made him take the long way around too, which I felt like he should have been able to take the short way back when he's got some kind of ankle situation or something. Like, you should be making him walk on that more.
Yeah, but. I mean, in any case, the rule is you're supposed to typically, more or less, it's basically closer, where you're closer to.
Right.
The goal is to get you off the field. At that point, if they're limping around on the sidelines, nobody cares. I mean, because theoretically, at that point, especially if there's a real problem, staff can come out and help him. They can carry him, move him around. But the idea is they want him to get him off the field. And because, again, as we've talked about, what you want to avoid is, the player being subbed off, walking slowly, shaking a few hands.
Right, of course.
Clap the fan. Do all the things that lead to time wasting.
Right. So my follow-up question on that, what I didn't think to ask, is you had said that there was a walk-off rule change, that this is something that had been disseminated. And what I was curious about is, so we noticed that during the Sevilla match when we faced them away, and it sounds like because we just saw this happen with Saka, I think that was during the Burnley match. That was a Premier League match. At what level was that rule change made? Is that a FIFA change or what?
Presumably that was a modification to the rules of the game or the laws of the game, which are, generally applied everywhere.
Right.
I would be curious. It's always an interesting question because FIFA and the FA and all these big organizations, their ideal is that the rules are consistent from the highest professional leagues all the way down to the amateur Sunday stuff.
Yeah.
Which was part of their argument resisting things like, replays, which again, there's a lot of argument about that. The English have a very different perspective on that. As an American, I feel differently, but I feel like that's one of those. I don't remember what level it was changed or even how well that's going to be enforced. The further down the the pyramid you go in terms of competition, but certainly at the highest levels, FIFA internationals, games like UEFA competitions, or even the Premier League and these top level English competitions. I think that's one of those you really can enforce at any level, because where you walk off, it doesn't matter if there are any forget how many people in the stands. Are there any stands at all? I mean, it doesn't matter. You can just get off at a certain place, and so I think that's one that's applied more generally across the game.
But so when that's the case, though, what body is making that decision? What body decided that should be the law of the game? Who is the soccer legislature?
Yeah, well, the laws of the game are managed officially by a board. I forget what they're actually called. That's run out of FIFA. Now, it's an interesting little historical side note. Each of what are called the home nations, so England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, each has a permanent representative on that board as the board.
Okay, so it's like the UN Security Council type setup,
sort of, but it's a smaller board, right? And so they make those collective decisions on the laws of the game. Now, how those are fully applied, all the different organizations make a choice whether or not to adopt those. Now, typically they do. I mean, look, if FIFA makes a change to the laws of the game, the FA is probably going to adapt them, because the FA was part of the decision. So, there's no reason they would necessarily not adopt that. A lot of the stuff you wouldn't see deals with more technical stuff like replays, which is going to be very technologically dependent. Even the highest level league in a smaller country maybe not be able to do replay because they just don't have the money for the technology in their stadiums. Versus being done, say, in a UEFA competition where UEFA can help cover that, or in the Premier League where they have the money. They can afford this stuff. So
yeah. Okay. Next follow-up item. A couple weeks ago, we played against a keeper whose name rhymed with a holiday that I was just joking about. It seemed like you were quick to move past that. Is that a taboo? Is that like a superstition that we don't mention it until it's closer, or just premature?
No. Totteringham's day jokes are good at any time of year. Okay. It's just, there was just something else to say. It sounds like it. That was a good laugh. We're not going to make a big, we're not too far ahead of it at this point. It's obviously November. So they're clearly having a strong enough season that
it'll get down to the wire this time.
When that day happens, it will be closer to the end of the season. Probably. Yeah. Again, I expect, well, we'll see. I think there's a general sense that I was reading something today, sort of looking ahead to the season. Right now, City is the clear favorite, obviously, to win the title. Arsenal and Liverpool are the two in the conversation for potentially challenging, definitely in that 2 and 3 spot. And then, Spurs is kind of in a second or a third tier sort of below that, with teams like Villa, Newcastle, arguably United, I guess. A disaster recently. Fighting for that 4th spot, So they'll finish, are they going to finish top 4? Probably, but... Now, they're top 4, but not. There's a difference between being 4th place and, what appears to be, at least in the early going, sort of the Liverpool, Arsenal. We could actually compete with City, maybe, for the title. And then, of course, City is sort of at this point now.
Right.
Feels a bit like a level of their own, as we've talked about.
Yeah. All right, so some follow-up about loans from an interesting source. So the day after we recorded last week, my father and I recorded, no relation. After that was a U.S. general election, and I worked that election. The election was on a college campus. Most of the voters in my poll site were college students, and so naturally there was a pretty long slump from 6 a.m. until maybe 9 or 10 a.m. where not a lot of students were awake and coming in to vote, right? So one thing that I did to occupy myself, I'm sure you relate, and actually one person I was working closely with was actually a professor at the school. But anyways, so one thing I did to occupy myself in that time was I saw that Apple Arcade recently gained the edition of Football Manager published by Sega. Wait, so it's Football Manager Touch. I'd never played this before. The text size is clearly meant for a 6-foot screen, not little tiny phone screen. The text is scaled down. It is not made large enough to read on a phone screen at all. But so I didn't play a lot, but I played enough to get to the point where and of course, I was managing Arsenal. I was putting myself in Arteta's shoes. What's the assistant coach's name? AFS. I can't. Stoyenberger.
Stuvenberg. Yeah.
But yeah. So right. So it got to the point where he was recommending some transfers. So I was reviewing transfers and making contracts and stuff. And I did see that there were variables in play that I hadn't had in my mind when I was discussing this on the show last week, where yes, you can optionally pay some or all of the player's salary as part of a transfer deal, as well as a transfer fee. So that was something that he had asked about. I wanted to follow up on. I've learned something new without even trying. So
yeah. Yeah, I did play a little Football Manager during COVID, during lockdowns, because I had a lot of time on my hands, as we all did. That is a rabbit hole you can go down. I have not played Football Manager since lockdown. I have to say, actually, I I briefly, everyone's got a football manager story, like everybody has a fantasy league story, fantasy team. But I had actually, I decided the one I stretched a long time was actually I did as the U.S. national team manager. I went through a World Cup cycle. Let's just say those games, by the time we got to the World Cup, I was pretty tense, which I was like, this isn't really I feel like this isn't healthy for me, is really what it came down to. And then, of course, the world started to reopen, and I was like, oh, I have actual things to do with my life now. So that was
right.
But yeah, Football Manager is a bit of a rabbit hole. Every once in a while I say to myself, I could re-download that, and I just think, no, don't do that to yourself. That was awful. Don't do that. It's definitely more of the business side of the game compared to a game like what was called FIFA, the EA Sports version, or now I believe it's now ESPN FC or EAFC or something like that.
Right.
Which is definitely more about the gameplay you actually play in the game. You can
It has management aspects, but it's definitely focused on the field.
Right. Yeah. The level of tactical nuance and the business side of the game is something you're going to get in Football Manager. You're not going to get in FIFA, which is much more about put a team together, go out and play, and they want to play the game.
So one other brief follow-up on transfers and stuff, like one word that I probably should have used because it's how I think of it in my head, but to me the biggest difference in worldwide soccer compared to every other sport I'm familiar with is liquidity. Like there's just so many teams, players are liquid in a way just because it is a financial term for a fairly financial concept. Like soccer has turned it into a business because of liquidity of the players. It just makes sense that players move around one direction. You don't have you don't have trades, right? Like he was asking about. Yeah. Or
I should say they are exceedingly rare. They do happen. There are instances of players being swapped. Like we had one a few years ago with United. We swapped. Oh God, it was two underperforming players both ways. Like it was a trade where everyone's like, we're trying to get rid of these guys, and then we got them like, oh, this is why they were trying to get rid of them. Yeah. Nobody wound up happy in this.
Right.
I know we picked up Henrik Mkhitaryan, and I forget who we sent to United, but either way, we weren't terribly thrilled with Mkhitaryan, and they weren't terribly thrilled with the guy they got. So yeah, they're not very common.
A correction from last week. I misspoke. I said something totally wrong. I had said something to the effect of if they had called a foul on Newcastle instead of giving them the goal, that somehow that would have led to a penalty kick for us, and it would have reversed it from 1-0 Newcastle to 1-0 us. And no, we were defending that. That could not be the case. Listening back, I was like, wait a second, Dove. No, that is not right.
Yep. They were in the box. Why not? It's a penalty.
Yeah, right. Which box? Who cares? And then one other thing I wanted to point out too, just listening back to that, was we were talking about like David Raya catching crosses, and I had mentioned, especially if it lands on the ground, it could be kicked in pretty easily if he's that far forward. But it could also lead to a very easy header if he missed it too, because if he misses it, it's in the air. Whoever is in position to get it could have an unopposed or more unopposed header to get it into. Mm-hmm. One follow-up question. So we had the question posed last week, what happens if the keeper gets a red card? And my research confirmed my initial hunch, which is, okay, well, you'd substitute somebody else and bring in your second string keeper. However, what I thought of this week, this is just kind of one of those edge cases my programmer's brain goes to. What if your keeper gets a red card after you've made your 5 substitutions? You're at your limit.
Then someone else on the field has to play keeper. And he gets
the powers of keeper. He's able to use his hands.
He'll get a keeper's kit. I might have someone else's name on it, or might just be blank, or he'll have to wear a different shirt of some kind. Maybe he'll just put on a warm. Basically, he has to be wearing something different. Obviously,
right.
He gets the gloves, and this has happened. I think I told the story. It happened in a game. New York City was playing in a playoff game against Orlando. Orlando's keeper got a second yellow. They were out of subs, so they had to put a position player in the net. He made a save in a shootout, which was very annoying.
Right, I remember you mentioning that now, yeah.
And actually it happened maybe a couple weeks, maybe around a month ago at this point. It happened in Serie A in Italy. AC Milan's keeper fouled out. They had to put a striker, former Arsenal striker Olivier Giroud came in, made a save, And now apparently they are selling, at least Milan was for a brief time, maybe they still are, was selling keeper kits, and you could buy them with Giroud's name on them. They would make them with they don't usually sell the keeper kits, and they certainly wouldn't sell them custom, but people were calling in, can I get a Giroud keeper kit? And they said, yeah okay, I guess we'll do it. And they sold out of them. People loved it. But people love Olivier Giroud and his handsome French forehead, meaty French forehead.
All right.
But yes, if that happens and a field player takes the gloves, gets a shirt, and he's the keeper.
Right. I thought it would be something like that. I wanted to confirm, so thanks. All right. We've gone really long on follow-up and other assorted topics. Let's drag it out even longer before we talk about this week's matches and talk about World Cup for next time. So it's going to be the international break again, and I've been informed by you that Africa is going to start having qualifying matches with this international break. So as we've done in the past, we're going to pick the teams this week that we will be following into the international break. So as a recap, I am currently following Argentina. That's you. You're following Colombia, boy. I'm not even looking at a list. That was just
okay. Would you like me to pick up on the list on this one?
Yeah, right. Sure, please.
You are following in South America. You are following Argentina, while I am following Colombia, and then for Asia, I am following Japan, and you are following India.
Correct. I agree. Amen.
Good.
So for Africa, who did you have in mind?
So do you want to talk briefly through the qualifying process in Africa?
Sure.
Or do you want to just jump into teams? So briefly, Africa has always been a complicated one because Africa has a lot of good teams that tend to miss out because their qualifying process has been a little convoluted in the past. Now they're simplifying it in part because they just get so many more spots. Should end up being simpler. We'll see how that actually happens in practice. But Africa's qualifying is very simple, 2-stage process. They have been divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 groups of 6 teams. 9 groups of 6 teams. The winner of each group will automatically qualify. Of the second place teams, the top 4 will qualify for a playoff, the winner of which will go to the Interconfederation playoffs, along with a couple other sides at the end of the qualifying round. So typically what you'd wind up with is you'd have a bunch of really good African teams that would have to play each other for a spot in the World Cup. Now what we're going to see is probably these top African teams on top of their groups, but we might see some of them drop into this playoff stage. So we'll see how that plays out. Could be very interesting.
Yeah, that seems like a good way to do it when you've got a lot of teams that could deserve an appearance. So yeah, that makes sense. All right. So who's your pick?
Do you not want to go first?
I suppose I can. I'm pretty sure that mine isn't in contention. So
well, we'll see. Who is it?
All right. Well, I happen to have a familial connection to South Africa. So they are a pot 2 team. So they will apparently Nigeria, I guess, is the pot 1 team in their group. So
Bafana, the boys, as they're known. They hosted the World Cup in 2010, the African World Cup. So they have qualified on their own before. So it's not the craziest idea that they could actually do so again. But being in a group with Nigeria Nigeria is one of the preeminent African powers. That group C, I'm just looking at it: Nigeria, South Africa, Benin, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and Lesotho. So I
have definitely heard of some of those. Yeah,
I think South Africa is probably going to be South Africa is probably likely in the running for that second spot. I think they have a pretty good shot at that playoff stage. Benin is one you might want to watch out for, but that's one I think it's a good team to wind up potentially in that second round. But who knows? Nigeria is a team that also, will slip up in moments when they shouldn't. And if there's, if South Africa can get some results against those lower ranked teams, maybe they're in position to take advantage of that if and when that happens.
Yeah. So who's your pick?
I am going to take Egypt. Egypt is actually historically one of the strongest African teams, at least in continental competitions. They've done very well over the years in the Africa Cup of Nations, the Confederation Championship. They have, on the other hand, had difficulty over the years qualifying for the World Cup. They're the pot 1 team. They are on top of Group A with Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. every 9-year-old's favorite African country. Um, I, I feel pretty good about Egypt's chances to qualify, but that's something that Egypt says every World Cup cycle, that they feel pretty good about their chances. They're, again, good side, a lot of good players. Mohamed El Neni out of Arsenal. They have an Arsenal connection. Mo Salah at Liverpool is probably the most famous Egyptian currently playing. The Pharaohs, typically a very good team. Should be in good position to qualify for the World Cup, but so like we talked about with Nigeria, every once in a while, some of these African teams you never quite know, and it just sort of falls apart for them. So
yeah,
but this time through, I'm pulling for you, Egypt. So
okay, and what's the U.S. doing?
Very quickly, so the U.S. is actually in the quarterfinals of the CONCACAF Nations League, a totally separate competition. They're going to play Trinidad and Tobago. They'll be in Austin, Texas on Thursday, and then they will be in Trinidad on next week, I think on Tuesday. Assuming they win those two legs, which they should, we can talk about the history of the U.S. and Trinidad next week. But assuming they win these two legs, they will go to the semifinals and finals, the final round of the CONCACAF Nations League, which will be held next March. And I believe I don't know if it's official actually I saw it's official, is going to be in Arlington, Texas at AT&T Stadium, home of the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry World, as it's sometimes both affectionately and unaffectionately known. But in North Texas. So I'm not saying I'm going to go, but I'm not saying it either. So we'll see. That'll be interesting. Cool. The stadium seats 90,000 people. It's not like I couldn't get a seat if I did.
Yeah.
So that'll be something to keep an eye on as well this coming weekend.
Cool. So let's have a very, very, very brief entry into the messy room. I have one question and a couple of very brief comments. So they played in a match this week. I caught the first 20 minutes or so, and then the last 30 minutes or so live. This was against NYCFC. So that was interesting. I'm not sure what this match was. It seemed like it had something to do with a golden nacho or something. What is it?
Yes, this was the Noche d'Or, which is, of course, a good mix-up of Spanish and French that everyone expects. So Messi, towards the end of the year, was announced as the winner of a FIFA award called the Ballon d'Or, the Golden Ball, which is basically given out to the World Player of the Year. He has now won it for the 8th time, which is a record.
Yeah.
He's really good. So in celebration of this, Inter Miami had an exhibition, the Noche d'Or, the Night of Gold, if we want to translate both languages to English. I had heard a rumor that there were supposed to be, it was actually supposed to be an exhibition against, I don't know, maybe a Chinese team, some other foreign team, because Miami did not qualify for the playoffs. But I guess for whatever reason that fell through. And so New York City, for some reason, was available and agreed to do it.
Okay.
This was a chance to sell a bunch of tickets and make the club a little bit of money, even though they're even though they didn't make the playoffs and could have a playoff game. And you know what? It probably worked, because I'm sure they got a bunch of people, because they can always sell tickets for people to go watch Messi play.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that probably allows me to answer my own question, but I'll still give you the opportunity. So one thing I don't know if we've really actually talked about it, but I noticed this starting at the end of last season when I was watching Manchester City playing in the Champions League final, and then in the I forget, I guess it was the FA Cup final would have been the other one that I saw them playing in. I noticed, so it seems like a pretty broad international convention that you'll have when you're playing in some kind of special game. They'll have a little commemorative blurb in the center of the chest with what the competition was and what the date is and probably who they were playing against or something, just a few pieces of information in text on the center of their chest. And so they did that for this exhibition match, the Noche d'Or. Messi didn't have that, though. In its place, he had some kind of special crest. Is that related to him receiving the Ballon d'Or? Is that what that is about, or is it something else?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
I didn't actually watch the game. I didn't really care. Let's be honest. I guess given it's something also you'll see these a lot usually for retired players. They call it testimonial. Where you'll have basically it's an exhibition game usually between two teams that are prominent in this particular player's history. My dad actually attended. Pele had a testimonial. Played at Giant Stadium back in the 70s. I believe it was between the New York Cosmos, which is the American team he played for at the end of his career, and then I believe it was also, my dad says it was a Brazilian national team. I think it actually was Santos, which is the club he played for in Brazil, and part of it was an exhibition game, and he apparently played one half for one team and then switched back to play the other for the other.
That's a cool idea.
This is essentially what it was. It was a testimonial to Messi, which is kind of weird because he's still actually going to play next year. He's still very much an active player.
Right.
But again, as we said, I'm sure Miami sold a bunch of tickets and made a bunch of money, and everybody walks away happy. So good for him.
Yeah. So, all right. So just a couple of very quick observations. I don't know if it really requires further commentary, but I just thought it was funny. So in American sports, I haven't noticed them doing this in Europe at all, but when they finally scored a goal, I think they ended up losing the match, but eventually they finally scored a goal and fireworks went off. This is something that I'm used to seeing in American stadiums when a touchdown or home run or goal is scored that will set off some kind of pyrotechnic display in the stadium. I have seen in Europe, there'll be like pyro cannons that'll just like shoot flames. I don't think I've seen actual fireworks before though. So it was just funny watching the live telecast of it though. The goal celebration's going on, the fireworks go off, they go back to the field, and all of a sudden the field is covered in mist. And it's the smoke from the fireworks. You just couldn't see what was going on. It was very cloudy for the next few minutes until the air cleared.
Yeah, fireworks are an American thing, and you'll see that. My favorite is you actually go to some, like the Super Bowl, which, when they play in an indoor stadium, they will still set off fireworks. And it's always weird at the beginning of the second half after that big halftime show where, everybody's just playing through the smoke. Because they were in it because they're inside.
Yeah, I never thought about it being inside and there being fireworks. It just seems ill-advised, but yeah.
Only in America.
So one other thing, and I know we've made fun of Real Salt Lake's name before on the show, but I hadn't seen it written until during this match. They mentioned it, and it's they don't even have the accent on the E, so it really does just look like Real Salt Lake. Like if you put the accent on the E, at least it would go along with the crown that they have in their crest. But
yeah, although I believe if you actually look at, I'm looking this up to be sure, but if you actually look at Real Madrid, they don't have an accent either.
Ah, okay.
So I mean, that's what they're copying. I mean,
yeah, of course, yeah.
This isn't a surprise, but yes, right. Houston did knock out Real Salt Lake on penalties, which they will now face one of the slightly less dumber though very Europeanized name, Sporting Kansas City.
So it's actually funny. I had a lot of live matches I watched this weekend. So I watched Messi live on Friday. I had watched Arsenal not live that Friday. I didn't get to watch the Sevilla match until I was watching the replay on Friday. But then we were watching TV, and Saturday night, it was really cool. Or Sunday, I got a notification from the Apple TV that match had gone to penalties. So it's cool that the Apple TV will do that, where it'll say, hey, there's a tense moment going on in this match. You should watch it. I think actually I also watched the end. That's why it was so much. I watched the end of the Sounders match. I forget who they were playing against, but I think they moved
Dallas.
on. Yeah.
It's Dallas.
Yeah, you're right. They beat Dallas to move on in the playoffs. So, but yeah, they were saying, oh, there's 20 minutes left and it's a close score. Maybe you want to watch this match. It's a cool idea. And it actually got me to watch matches or parts of matches that I would not have otherwise. And the penalty kickoff or penalty shootout was something that Reed, my son, watched with me too. And he was actually interested in watching that. And it was a pretty good one. So saves on both sides. So.
Yeah, good. It was a good win for Houston.
Yeah. So, All right. We're leaving the messy room. Before we get to this week's matches, let me take a brief moment to thank our sponsor for this week, Zencastr. So we use it for every episode. We're using it right now to record this. It's the easiest thing. We just open up Chrome. I open it up. I click record. Keith has it open, and we're off to the races. That's all. It takes care of everything. Our tracks, our video and audio tracks get uploaded as we're recording, and then we're able to download it when we're all done. It records locally. It's been an indispensable tool for us. It's so easy. You just record a podcast by logging into your browser and starting to record a high quality podcast right away. You record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. To which we can definitely attest. We've definitely had connection stability issues at various times, possibly, including this week. So far, so good, but we've been touch and go a couple times. No matter what, we've never lost a recording in Zencastr. There have been times where we thought we were going to, and yet that multi-layered backup strategy saved our bacon. It is an all-in-one solution. So if you thought about podcasting before and gave up thinking you needed a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and then distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations super easily. You can also use their new iPhone app if you're in the field. I'll be on vacation next week. Perhaps I might try it, depending on the recording circumstances. And you can just record right from your iPhone. So if that all sounds good to you, so it's something you want to try, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, that is Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience as we do for all our podcasting and content needs. It's time for you to share your story. The easiest way would be to use the link in the description or show notes to pop that open and sign up. And we hope you do. So we are over half an hour in at this point, so we might have to give short shrift to at least one of these matches.
Well, you know what? Well, I think actually it's probably a good way to point this out. I thought they were very similar matches in a lot of ways. I don't want to say we necessarily should address them exactly together as if they were the same game. But I don't know. Let me turn that on you. As I watched these two of those, I felt I was watching two games that tactically played out in very similar ways. Is that the impression you got?
I hadn't been thinking about that at the time. Now that you pointed out, I think so. I think that we played a similar lineup in both matches. I think that Sevilla was... The score doesn't exactly end up indicating this, but I feel like they were probably a little bit stiffer competition still, but not as strong as the first time we played them. I think that overall that it was easier on us.
Yeah, I think the scoreline flatters them a little bit. I thought they looked... I don't want to say... and I want to be very careful about this saying this. Like, I'm not saying they weren't trying or they quit or they threw the game or anything. But it didn't really look like they were trying. Like, it didn't look like they came to the... It looked like they came to the game with the idea that, well, let's see if we can get a draw out of this one. And, you know, they had as I understand, they had a big game. They were some rotation in their lineup. They're dealing with some injuries. They had, I think, a big game in La Liga on the weekend. So they might have looked and said, we're not picking up three. We're not getting 3 points in London, whatever. And then poor Juan Lu is going to be... Every time he closes his eyes, there's Gabriel Martinelli going around him.
Yeah.
Just tortured him.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me, one through line throughout both games is I'm really starting to get frustrated with Kai Havertz. And to be fair to him, it seems like he's getting frustrated with himself also. You can see it on his face every time he blows an opportunity, which he excels at. But it's just frustrating. He's in good places to score a lot of time, and he just can't finish. It's very frustrating to watch.
Yeah, and I think some of there's a bit of adjustment still for him, sort of figuring out exactly where it is. I think Arsenal in general is struggling with this sort of sense. There's been kind of a sense that, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this. You know, last year we were handbrake off. I mean, we were pedal to the metal. We were go, go, go. We scored goals early. We scored goals late. We scored goals, scored goals, scored goals. And it feels like we are sacrificing some of that go-for-broke offensive style this year for a little more, and this is the general sense that we're being more controlled in games. Now, there are some clear reasons why this may be the case. We've been dealing with a lot more injuries in the early part of the season.
Yeah,
look
definitely.
At the lineup we rolled out. I mean, look at this week. We didn't have some of our first-choice offensive players. We didn't have Gabriel Jesus. We didn't have Martin Odegaard. We don't have Thomas Partey. I mean, these are some really important guys, important to pushing the game forward and driving us forward offensively that we had in the early part of last year, obviously, and currently don't, and we've never really been able to quite get them all in position. The other part of that is some of this is, I think, deliberate coaching, that Arteta is having them play more controlled. They're conserving a little bit more energy. ideally, this means they'll be a little, I don't want to say fresher, but perhaps a little fresher in the latter part of the season. Having not gone for broke in September, you have maybe just a little bit left over in the tank to kick on in April. I don't know that it quite works that way. Obviously, we can't do a one-to-one comparison. This time of year, we were getting ready for the World Cup, so you can't really make those comparisons across the last 2 seasons. But I wonder if that's a little bit of it as well. We have been a little more controlled, and I think some of it is deliberate. But again, some of it I think is also adjusting. And I think Havertz, there's the adjustment he has to joining a new team, but also the adjustment of Arsenal itself is trying to sort of figure itself out. And yeah, the biggest weakness to his game, as you point out, is his finishing. He has missed some real opportunities, and that's very annoying. Yeah. I've been a bit more of a Havertz defender. I know here, and we talked about this. The fact that sorry about that.
Oh,
a little Amber Alert popped up. For a child, by the way, within the state of Texas, was like 6 hours from here, I'm sure. It's a big state. But anyway, sorry. I think with Havertz, the fact that he keeps getting himself in dangerous positions is a good sign.
Right.
But you're right. Yeah, at some point you do want to start seeing that finishing going in there. But I think, I understand the frustration people have, and I'm starting to get a little bit too. You kind of want to see when is that going to turn into goals? Because we could really use some right now, and we're
exactly. Yeah. Yep. So I'm just looking through my notes of the match. I'm not really seeing much else that I had specifically wanted to talk about. One thing, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. In the 71st minute of the Burnley match, we had to take some time to sit and watch Fabio. I almost called him Pablo Vieira. That's just what we're going to call him on the show. Fabio Vieira sitting on the pitch tying his shoes. So apparently the PGMOL is going to have some shoe tying classes for their referees now too, like we were talking about with the U6 refs.
It is funny. Sometimes guys' shoes come off, and some of them are, it's interesting. Some of them are tied on there pretty tight, so when they come off, they have to unlace them so that they can actually get them back on their feet. And it is kind of funny. You see a guy there, what's he doing? He's tying his shoes. But
it was just funny how long it took, I guess. Yeah. And he looked annoyed the whole time, like he was having trouble or something. I just don't know what the situation was. But
that's got to be the weirdest thing, that you're sitting there. It's not like you're hurt. It's not like there's anything really wrong, but you have to, tie your shoes, something that's theoretically very simple. But you're doing it, of course, in a stadium of 60,000 people who are all watching you, which I don't know. Something about that feels very weirdly disconcerting to me. Like that would, for some reason, it's one thing to be a professional athlete and to do all the things that you do, in part knowing full well that like most of the people watching you are incapable of that. But everybody ties their shoes, and then here you are in the field. And that's what you have to do. And I might be self-conscious about that. I don't know. That's a very interesting one.
We'll need to get a slow motion replay of his technique.
I don't know. People make fun of the way I tie my shoes, and we can have that conversation another time. But this might be an opportune moment for me to educate our audience a little bit, because I think a lot of adults don't realize that they may be tying their shoes wrong unknowingly. Let me just say this, because this was news. I was talking to a parent or something, because I was talking about kids' shoelaces coming untied, and I think a lot of grown-ups don't realize. So you do the first part, you cross the laces around, right? And then you loop, swoop, and pull, right? However, what you may not realize is, depending on which direction you cross in the beginning, whether the back lace is the left one or the right one, depending on which one is in back, you need to loop, swoop, and pull. Like when you swoop around, you need to go either from behind or from in front, depending on which lace is in which position. And if you do it the wrong way, you end up with the loops perpendicular to the rest of the shoelace. You want your loops to be parallel with the laces as they approach the knot, right? When the loops go up and down, like toward your toes and toward your leg, you've tied what's actually a granny knot. And as that gets tugged by your foot, that'll pull looser instead of pulling tighter.
and you may not be aware of it, and you would probably just shrug it off like, okay, whatever, they're tied. But it is actually possible to tie your shoes wrong, even doing it what seems like the right way. So I've just been stressing, not explaining all that to my son yet, but the consistency of it. I'm teaching him. I know my method when I do it a certain way. I know it always turns out right. And I was teaching him, do it that way. Don't think about it as always in this order in that direction. So that way, hopefully he won't have a granny knot.
I feel like this is a shot at Burnley that we're spending our time not talking about them and talking about shoe tying. But again, I think they came in sort of like we talked with Sevilla. I think they came in. Burnley's struggling coming up, and they mentioned this during the broadcast that they are, because I to mention the audience. I actually spent last week dealing with a symptomatic case of COVID, which was first time I've had a symptomatic case, so that was unpleasant. So I did not go to the bar. I watched by myself alone at home, as one probably should in those circumstances. So I heard the commentary, which was an interesting change of pace. Burnley is one of the youngest teams in the Premier League. We, by the way, are one of the like the second youngest,
right,
which I find very interesting. But Burnley's struggling. They were a little fortunate to pick up a goal. Although I thought overall Raya, we've been critical of Raya in the past. I thought he actually was. I mean, he didn't have a lot to do. Certainly, he didn't have anything to do in the Sevilla game. But I thought he was pretty solid when he was called into action. Did make a couple good saves, at least in the first half in the Burnley game when game was still very much in the balance before Leandro Trossard gave himself up for the goal. Glad he's okay. And he came back out for the second half like he was fine. So, I guess it was just a bruise. That's right. Good. And then, Saliba gets it right back. He made a couple of great tackles in both games. He's so good. He's just so good. And then, did you enjoy the crane kick from Zinchenko?
Yes. Plenty of comparisons to the Karate Kid were made by the commentators after that one.
But deservedly so. I mean,
it was amazing. It was crazy.
That's such a strange position to be in, and it's such an easy ball to just blast into the second deck. And he gets the perfect amount of curl on it that just dips right in.
I mean, it was like Neo the first time he dodges the bullet with that like famous bullet time shot where the camera like moves around him in a circle and then he finishes the kick. It was like that. It was just like flying up in the air and So I guess if you're gonna have goals, I mean they again like the Sevilla goals. I'll be honest, I'm trying to remember them in my head and they don't stick out to me. But the Burnley goals, I can picture them all. I can picture Trossard throwing himself into the post. I can picture Saliba, coming up for a solid header, and then Daniel-san here or Oleksandr-san with the finish. It was again, if you're going to score, make it a good one. That was a lot of fun. Not so fun at the end of that game. We saw. What did you think of Vieira? We talked about him in the shoes. Yeah, it's a more serious incident. What do you think about the red card? Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, judging by his reaction, so I've got my take on it, and I've also got my like secondary. How did he react to it? There was not much argument from him, not much indignation, right? Like it seems like he pretty much like, yeah, my bad. That was a mistake. Clearly, it wasn't something he did on purpose, but it was contact with the studs on the leg, like, and fairly high up on the leg, if I remember right. And it stinks. I don't think he was being reckless, but I think it's just the kind of thing that's going to happen sometimes. And he felt bad and tried helping the guy however he could or whatever. And, I think it was a red card. It's unfortunate, but if that had happened to us, I would want it to be a red card. So.
Yeah, that was one of those. I was watching it live, and I sort of kind of missed it. Partly because it was late enough in the game. We're up by 2 goals. It was kind of over, so I admit parts. I was like, let me clean up for breakfast. But then you see the replay, and you're like, ooh.
Like live, it didn't look like much at all. You're like, what are they talking about? And then as soon as I showed the replay, I was like, oh yeah.
And again, the kind of thing we would call for that's always the good test, right? If that happened the other way, how would you feel about it? Yeah, I agree. The problem that's going to put in for us is, of course, that with a straight red, and it was a straight red, he's now out for 3 games.
Right.
Which, Fabio Vieira isn't like a critical piece to what Arsenal does.
No, but
Fabio Vieira's out. Thomas Partey is out. Martin Odegaard is out. Like we're starting to. Well, really, I'm focusing on players in the midfield. We're starting to run
midfield,
in that part of the field, and we'll talk a bit about this. I think next week, sort of looking ahead. We've sort of used the international breaks as a way to break up their schedule. Right, there was the first chunk of games August and September. The next chunk of games, September to October. We've now hit this third chunk, October, between the October and November breaks. We're about to hit a run of about another 7 games coming out of the break, 2 a week. We still have 2 Champions League games, the 2 more Champions League games. We have a league game. A Premier League game is also going to be midweek. We have games on the Saturdays as well. So we're about to hit a 7-game stretch, which will take us about to the holidays, the festive fixtures, right around Christmas and New Year's. And a couple of those we're going to be missing Vieira. I wonder if perhaps maybe you see him play in the Champions League games. We still have Lens at home and at PSV. I wonder if you see him play in those games, if only to give some other guys a breather and get him some games.
Right.
And what are the knock-on effects? I mean, that's kind of the problem with the injuries is you have the knock-on effects of some guys who you're working guys in. We saw Mohamed El Neni put in an appearance this week, it's great that he's up and running and he's a nice, useful player to have. But you add that in, I mean, you'd start to worry a little bit about bodies, and we talked a little bit about this as well. We're going to hit January, which is going to see the Asian Cup and the Africa Cup of Nations, the 2 continental competitions, which means we are at the very least going to be without Tomiyasu with Japan, Partey with Ghana, probably El Neni if he's healthy with Egypt. We're going to be missing a couple of guys, key players, and it'll be very interesting to see how we think about that. Again, we sort of forgotten about him. We had Jurrien Timber, right? He was a big signing for us. He was clearly playing already, and now he tore his ACL and he's out for the year. That's an injury, and that's testing that depth that we've supposedly been building up. Having Declan Rice helps. Nobody talks about how much he cost.
Right. He's been awesome. We've been very good with him.
Yeah, Declan Rice is awesome.
No arguments.
That's the moral of the story. Anyway, we've kind of covered a lot of ground here. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about Sevilla Burnley? Like, we're just going to meld them into really one opponent. Do you have any other thoughts about Sevilla Burnley or either game, or do we want to just jump into our player or players of the week?
I have a couple quick questions, I think, the one for each match. So I noticed the Champions League refs, or I guess UEFA refs, who were on the pitch for Sevilla, on their shirt backs, all the way at the bottom, it said, "Be a referee." I'm wondering who that's meant to appeal to. Is like UEFA hiring, or are they just saying get involved in the grassroots, like we've talked about, like just locally? So both of those, or...
So that's for everybody. As we've talked about, being a referee is difficult. Not a lot of people want to do it, in part because of a lot of the responses you get for being a referee. So there's a push to make sure, because it is going to be a problem. And I'm sure you do with youth sports. It's difficult to find people who will be referees, umpires, things like that. And so they're part of trying to, be a part of this, like join. Yes, at the grassroots level, but like at a level like UEFA, if you're refereeing the Champions League, you're a guy with a lot of experience. They don't have trouble finding referees for that. It's the people who are underneath them, working their way up through the system, the ones who are supposedly the best that are making it to this level. Yep. Those are the people they're having trouble finding. So yes, they're trying to get people involved in the game at that level. I hope it is, because we do need referees. We've been critical of them, but we need them. They're the game. Yep. You really can't have the game without them.
No, of course. So one last question. So during the Burnley match, they mentioned that Raya plays for Spain. Is he their number one? Is he their main keeper, or is someone else?
No, he is not, in part because Spain has several potential keepers who are in that sort of mix. He's in the mix. I mean, the hope, of course, is that for him is that he will be their keeper. In his case, he's hoping next summer during the European Championships. He has been called up for their games in this window, but also on there, Unai Simon, who's the goalkeeper for Athletic Bilbao. Players not called up include Kepa Arrizabalaga, who plays for Real Madrid. he's pretty good. Robert Sanchez, the keeper at Chelsea, has also been played up. He's actually played. He was called up in March of this year. So Spain has a lot of competition, but they're Spain. They're on that short list of teams that says, yeah, actually, no, we really could win the World Cup. So
right,
that the competition for that is fierce for that position.
Right, well, that's why it was surprising because it didn't seem like he was in that level. That was why I thought the answer was probably no, but they didn't say otherwise. They just said he's been called up for his national team or whatever. So I just didn't know in what capacity.
Yeah, no, he's on the list. I mean, Spain is typically they can find someone who's better than who plays for Brentford, but he plays for Arsenal. I mean, Spain's keeper could play for Arsenal. There's that's sort of the idea of the class of player. But of course, it's Spain. I mean, chances are the keeper at Barcelona or Real Madrid, if he's Spanish, probably be the Spanish keeper. But you got to try.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about player of the week. Who's your pick?
We've kind of touched on this. I think they're two very different games. I think they deserve two very different picks for player of the game. I am going to say, and maybe you'll agree with these. I don't know. I think Martinelli was the best player on the field against Sevilla. We talked about him torturing Juan Lu. He was really good. Got at least an assist. He was very good overall. Caused a bunch of problems for them. I think I'm going to say Trossard for the Burnley game. The goal I think was a good sort of cap to the fact that he did a lot up top. That's a difficult position he's asked to play, sort of in that. It's not a false nine, but almost sort of. He's not really a striker, but playing in that central position, sort of where Jesus would be. He's definitely in some ways, his passing and movement is a little more Jesus than Nketiah. Nketiah is much more of a classic number 9, a classic goal-scoring striker. But I think Trossard did a lot of good things there to pull Burnley around, cause some opportunities, and is put his body on the line to get the goal. And it was a big moment to go in at half scoreless. Would have been a big boost for Burnley, but to get in a goal, to be up 1-0 was a good big moment in the game, and he got it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I am in full agreement on the player of each of those matches. Martinelli and Trossard were my picks too for those. Martinelli, I don't remember the last time I've seen him looking like he wanted to win as much as he did against Sevilla. It was just relentlessly chasing and pursuing. And like you said, he had an assist, but it wasn't even that. It was just the entire game. He was just on top of things, just like going after the ball. Like I haven't seen him probably since last season. I don't remember him having that intensity at any point this season so far. And yeah, Trossard just all match long against Burnley, culminating in taking one for the team. So if you had to pick between those two, who would you give it to for the week?
I guess if I had to pick between the two, I think Martinelli did more in the Burnley game than Trossard did in the Sevilla game. So if I was going to lean one way or the other, I'd say Martinelli. But I do think Trossard deserves a particular shout out for his performance in Burnley. Or we could just, do the difference and pick a player like Saliba or Declan Rice, who we've talked about are both pretty awesome. So.
Yeah, I between those two, I would lean to Trossard just for having a direct goal, and the manner in which he scored that goal certainly deserves some recognition for a lack of concern for his own safety when getting a goal for the team. So yeah, cool. What is coming up next week? I know it's a lot as we're tracking all the World Cup qualifications.
Yes, international break. We're up to 6 teams for World Cup qualifying that we're tracking, with only 3 confederations to go. So that'll be fun. Let's see if we can go through this. In South America, Argentina is on 12 points. They're the top team in South American qualifying. They will face Uruguay at home and then at Brazil, which, by the way, if you're actually going to try to track down an Argentina game during World Cup qualifying, Argentina-Brazil never disappoints. Last time out actually involved a couple of, I think it was the game in Brazil, involved a couple of Brazilian health officials running onto the field, stopping the game because allegedly some of the Argentine players hadn't passed their physical or hadn't passed some COVID tests. I mean, some like, what is happening here moments.
Wow.
Never disappoints. I think CONMEBOL qualifying might be, I don't remember if some South American stuff is on Paramount Plus. I don't know if they have that one. Just Again, if you want to track down a game, Brazil-Argentina never disappoints. That's Argentina. Also in South America, Colombia is currently in 5th in South American qualifying. They will play Brazil at home in their first game and then be at Paraguay in the second game. Switching to Asia, we look at Group A, the second round of qualifying where both India and Japan are getting started with qualifying. India's in Group A. They will open at Kuwait and then play their second game at home against Qatar, the hosts of the most recent World Cup. So an interesting couple of games for India. Both critical games. Kuwait's a team they're probably competing with for that second spot in the group, and Qatar. I mean, you beat Qatar's your seeded team, and they've got some weaknesses. If India gets a result there, that could make that group a little more interesting. And then Japan will open up its qualifying at home against Myanmar in their first game, and then their second game will be technically at Syria. But as you might know, Syria is not in a good way as a country right now, so that game will actually be played in Saudi Arabia. But it will be technically a home game for Syria. Japan will play, and Japan will open up its group with that. 2 games. Japan should feel pretty confident about getting 4 or 5 wins out of this group. I would be shocked if they perform less, but we'll see. You never know.
Yeah.
And then finally, our two new sides, the Africans opening World Cup qualifying. Egypt is in Group A. They will be home against Djibouti, and then second game at Sierra Leone, which a game is actually being played in Liberia. Presumably, there is some difficulty with Sierra Leone. Again, you get to all parts of the world. Who knows what you're going to run into problem-wise. And then finally, South Africa is home against Benin and then at Rwanda. So that is what is coming up over the international break. And then, of course, looking way, way ahead, Arsenal and Brentford back in the Premier League. That'll be on the 25th, the Saturday after American Thanksgiving.
Right. Lots to look forward to. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and some other places, and we appreciate you subscribing to our show and sharing it with friends. If you're watching on YouTube, you might want to consider listening to our podcast. If you're listening to our podcast, you might consider watching on YouTube. And of course, if you do watch on YouTube, please like and subscribe, as mentioned earlier. To support the show even more, of course, you can become a Gooner U superfan for ad-free episodes and bootleg recordings available the night we record. Another little thing that we're doing is we are running long, so when we say goodbye, we keep recording for a little bit. So if you're a subscriber, you get to hear what we banter about after we've kicked out the public. So it's another little bonus for you. It's only $1 a month, and there's a link in the show notes to join. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can find them with our special link in the description. You can follow our show on Twitter at Gooner U Show for updates and to ask questions. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
Come on, you Gunners.